Eskom began load shedding at 6 p.m. tonight, moving that schedule 3 hours later. Now, with the increasing power outages and failing infrastructure buckling under increased power demand, the parastatals executives made the comments this time around what is needed, particularly to update the 3 units which went down, resulting in the return of the rolling blackouts. Our business reporter, Kopano Gumbi, has those details for us.
The challenges at Eskom will just not let up. Just as 1 unit is up and running, several more give out. Coupled with that, the demand for power continues to grow while supply remains unreliable.
We need that 4,000 to 6,000 megawatts of additional capacity, and I'm specifically saying capacity in the country. But again, I want to repeat on sound financial principles. Because Eskom at this point in time, we are shy. And what we have available in terms of capacity to grow the needed economy of the country is really challenging.
The utilities' capacity constraints include operating at a loss and over 400 billion rand in debt, which makes it difficult for them to borrow any more money to build extra capacity. In addition, the performance of the existing units continues to deteriorate, resulting in nearly double the number of load-shedding days this past winter than we had last season.
The system is unreliable and unpredictable. Now, you're talking about the load-shedding, yes, 32 days year to date, since the 1st of April. That is quite a number of days. And if you compare it to last year, 47 in total.
The most recent explosion at Medupi's Unit 4 has taken over 700 megawatts of power off the grid, and it's expected to take more than 2 years to fix that unit. Kusile and nuclear plant Koeberg also have units that are down.
Koeberg is so important for the generation capacity of the country. So when you lose a unit there, you immediately, because it's 1,000 megawatts, that is one phase of load shedding that you're talking about. Medupi, we didn't foresee at all. That explosion in the generator, we didn't foresee. The burn, the fire in the Kendall generator transformer, that we didn't foresee. Those are over and above, the normal day-to-day, unfortunately, breakages that we do have.
The emergency power plan that was meant to reduce the instances of load shedding has still not been put into effect, meaning that Eskom and its unreliable and unpredictable system continue to put the country's economic recovery at risk. Not only that, the pain and inconvenience of load shedding for citizens is not likely to go away anytime soon. For Newzroom Afrika on Channel 405, I am Kopano Gumbi in Johannesburg.
So what needs to be done to stabilize electricity in South Africa, and what alternative sources of energy should Eskom and the country look into for power supply? To talk to me about this, I'm joined now by the energy experts, Mohammed Mahdi, Lungile Mashele, and City Power spokesperson Isaac Mangena. Good evening to you all, and thank you very much for your time. That's the best way of putting it. As 1 unit comes back online, 2 more, or maybe even more, go down. Can Eskom actually afford at this particular time to invest in further capacity so that this yo-yo effect does not continue? Lungile?
Eskom at the moment has no money. They are cash strapped. For them to do anything, they would have to go to the capital markets and raise money for additional capacity. So it's pretty much leaving it up to the private sector through the independent power producers to actually come and to actually build projects and to come to Eskom. And as the COO reiterated earlier on, was that ultimately they're looking for reliable capacity, anything between 4,000 to 6,000 megawatts, but they're also looking for cost effective. So it really has to be affordable so that Eskom can afford it. And that is the key stumbling block that Eskom is currently facing. It is not in a position to invest in its own generation capacity.
All right, we'll come to the financial operational problems, but you're raising another issue. You're saying independent power producers could possibly be the answer. Can they trust Eskom's transmission infrastructure?
Oh, absolutely. In the presentation that was given earlier on by the GE of Transmission, what is available, what is built is reliable. We are looking at about 98%, maintenance complete. The real problem that Eskom is actually facing is that certain areas are congested. And these are your areas in your Northern Cape. There are certain areas as well in the Eastern Cape. And what this basically means is that if we're looking at new renewable projects, they will not be able to come out of those two provinces. We perhaps have to look at Mpumalanga or Gauteng, Northwest Free State, for other areas to actually invest in. So it also limits our investment space. But then again, Eskom does not have the money to currently invest in new transmission capacity as well.
Isaac Mangere, we saw in the weekend a pushback from the city saying they do not accept Eskom's load shedding schedule because you're saying you were able to generate your own extra power from, I think, the Kelvin Power Station. If I'm correct, you'll correct me there. But one sits and then looks at this and says, at least 80% of your supply, or at least 80% of the city that you supply, that power certainly would rely pretty much on Eskom giving you the power. How then can you make promises to the people that there would never be load shedding?
The decision was basically based on the technical report that came out of Kelvin Power Station. Remember, we signed a power purchase agreement with Kelvin as an independent power producer because of the challenges that Eskom keeps on facing, which we find ourselves basically caught in, and it's basically disrupting our developmental plans as the city of Johannesburg. So that's why we are actively in the market looking for new capacity to ensure that we add it onto our grid so that we can be able to offset load shedding, the challenges that are faced by Eskom.
So is your plan to have in ratio more capacity from independent producers than you are getting from Eskom currently?
Yes, indeed. The over-reliance on Eskom is really not working for us as the city of Johannesburg, and especially our plans, developmental plans as the city. And so that's why we are currently.
Isaac, you got muted there.
Putting out a request for, an invitation for independent power producers that can actually, help us as the city of Johannesburg. Tomorrow, the mayor, Councillor Mpho, will be the energy mix of the city of Johannesburg. Tomorrow as part of our efforts to ensure that we deal with the challenges that we have in terms of capacity, but also to ensure that we protect our residents from load shedding as imposed by Eskom on us.
I'll come back to that. I've got that statement. I'm looking at it. That announcement being made tomorrow at 9. Maybe you'll let us in on what some of your feasibility studies have revealed as far as the cheaper options and alternatives. But Mohammed, let me bring you in here. I mean, if we look at what is tripping the lights in South Africa, Lungile has already raised one of the issues, financial operational problems at Eskom, and one academic saying that the dithering on the addressing of the debt problem at Eskom would actually make this particular issue worse. What are the possible solutions? I mean, the UIF, clearly the unions don't want anything to do with that. The pension fund, the UIF also doesn't want anything to do with that. The tariffs are said to be inefficient and actually not prudent. So what else do we have left?
Yeah, I think the problem is that we keep framing the solution in terms of Eskom. And what we need to do is actually take Eskom out of the equation as far as possible. It's really vital that we unbundle Eskom, that you get the transmission distribution side separated from Eskom. And generation has its own set of problems. It's an entirely different animal compared to the transmission distribution side of Eskom. And then allow the regulatory regime to be opened up even more than it currently is. Take Eskom even out of the equation where they have to approve and they have to get involved in any independent power producer programs or initiatives. Allow the independent power producers to hook directly into an independent transmission generation and distribution grid. And then you'll see the private sector coming to the party. You'll see other entities coming to the party. So that is one side of the equation. The other side of the equation, we really need to stop the focus on Eskom only. Government needs to do its bit as well. And many times we talk about this debt. The debt is a red herring when it comes to what is possible right now. It's not a red herring in terms of we need to address it, we need to comply with, the obligations of the debt and all of that. But right now, there are solutions that are possible, and we keep dangling this issue of Eskom's historical debt to prevent problems from being solved in new and innovative ways. And we need to unlock the municipalities. The municipalities do have plans, not only City Power, but many municipalities have plans. Allow them the freedom and the space to go and find their own generation. Don't buckle them, don't, laden them with the problems of Eskom, and don't force Eskom down their throats. This is a problem that we have with many municipalities.
Mohammed Mahdi, appreciate you. Stay on. Lungile, stay on. Isaac Mangena, stay on. We'll continue the conversation in a moment with In Focus. Stay with us. Back with you tonight on In Focus. Energy experts Mohammed Mahdi, Lungile Mashele, as well as City Power spokesperson Isaac Mangena with us tonight. Can Eskom afford to invest in more capacity? Well, they are saying the answer actually is looking away from Eskom and certainly looking at independent power producers. Suppose that's what the government is also banking on, independent transmission and market operators. So, Isaac, tell us then what your feasibility studies have revealed, which you have undertaken over the years as far as analysis of a viable, cheaper and an alternative mix for the city.
So basically, over the years, we've been conducting these feasible studies to basically try and find the alternatives to the electricity, because of not only is it not reliable currently as it is, but also because of it's very expensive. As you've seen in the past, when people have been complaining about the electricity itself being expensive. So we are looking at diversifying, looking into things like gas, solar energy. Already we've got 1% that we are getting from waste at one of our dams in Poison's area. So those are some of the things that we want to invest more. We want to call on private partners to basically come and invest into that, so that we're able to basically have a cushion when it comes to the challenges that we are currently facing as a country in terms of capacity coming from Eskom, so that we are able to exclude the city of Johannesburg in particular out of the national grid. But I'm sure even other municipalities, as Mohammed has already pointed out, are already looking into that. Cape Town is already working on that, and so we had already started with this to ensure that we deal with this. So tomorrow the mayor will be basically putting all those plans on the table and also putting the rents and cents around it, so that we can start with the process later this month, before the end of this month, which will see more players being invited. And I think Mohammed is also correct in that we have a situation currently where Eskom can actually decide for municipalities and obviously in terms of regulations and so forth to say to basically basically, block some of the initiatives that municipalities are trying to bring to the table. So that is very difficult for us, and that's why even when we got that extra capacity from Kelvin Power Station, when we wrote to Eskom, there were some difficulties in terms of getting through to them. But we are talking to Eskom. We have had already 2 fruitful meetings yesterday and today, and we'll continue to talk to analyze some of the technical reports that we presented to them to show that we do have that capacity to can basically offset stage 1 and stage 2 from the city of Johannesburg.
You have, of course, since agreed to institute load shedding on account of saving the national grid. I believe that's part of the agreements that you went into in your negotiations. But there are 2 issues with what you're raising. One is sales volumes are on the decline if you look at Eskom, right, which tells you that more and more of the bigger players are now independent, or at least off the grid, and generating to an extent their own electricity. But second to that, operational costs continue to increase. At Eskom itself, we can argue as to why they've increased by at least 30%. And this is what they then pass on to the consumers via the tariffs that they keep asking from NERSA. How are you going to cushion the consumers from that? I mean, should your plan actually go ahead and be successful? Isaac? Okay, I think I've lost Isaac there on the line. He's unable to hear me. But let me take this one to you then, Lungile. I mean, with the cost of generating electricity becoming more and more expensive, I mean, a city power idea of saying we'll be able to produce this cheaper, is that viable at this stage?
It's a very tricky thing, right? Because they're talking about new generation that's going to come online. Currently, they pay a reduced charge to Eskom, and then over and above that, they have their own additional charges, which they pass on to consumers. So there was a study done by ASAC, which is a chamber, and they basically revealed that if you had industry or a factory in 2020, and this factory was getting electricity from Eskom, they would have paid 46 million rand for the year of 2020. Versus if they were a City of Johannesburg customer, they would have paid 71 million rand. Whilst I do appreciate that new generation could possibly mean a reduction in tariffs, however, in reality, that is not always the case. And it will form part of a blended tariff, which might reduce marginally, but otherwise it would be very, very expensive as well. And especially if you're looking at things that are more innovative, and more importantly, even if we speak of renewables, we need to remember that the auctioned prices that we're seeing in the Renewable Energy IPP program are not what private companies are attracting, and are certainly not what municipalities would attract. The Eskom prices come with government guarantees, they come with subsidies, they're a very different scheme altogether. In this case, they might not be able to attract those same guarantees, subsidies that make it cheaper, and they might not have the volumes to also have those economies of scale to make it cheaper as well. Yeah. So we should be very cautious when looking at municipal tariffs and looking at shifting there.
Mohammed, I see you itching to come in. Is that a red herring argument?
So I think Lungile is right in terms of some of the aspects, but where I would differ is in terms of the prices. We've actually built plants, we've built independent plants, standalone plants, and I can tell you today, with the technologies that are available, it is possible to provide renewable energy in combination with gas or similar, so hybrid solar gas plants, at prices that are cheaper than Eskom and cheaper than the municipality. So right now, we have the technology, we have the means, and we don't need the large scale in order to be able to produce power cheaper than Eskom. It's very, very doable. I can tell you from personal experience, we have built over 24 plants just in the last 12 months, doing exactly that, providing power to the private sector at at prices that are cheaper than Eskom. And it's not just us. This is fairly common now in the industry. Many commercial and industrial clients are building their own plants. And one of the attractions of building their own plants is that they are getting tariffs that are cheaper than Eskom, and they don't have to outlay any capital because the providers of the solutions are able to fund it and are able to get it funded simply because of the viability of the solution itself. And this is baseload power. This is not intermittent power. It's not just renewable. It's a combination of gas and solar, or gas and wind, or solar and wind, but it is possible.
So you're telling us then you are largely responsible for the sales volume decline at Eskom with all these plants that you're building.
Well, I'd like to take full credit for that, but the many companies are able to cut into Eskom's market share. And that brings us to a really critical problem for Eskom. Eskom has a declining sales base, a declining market, and they have increasing ops and maintenance costs, and they have a fleet that is on average over 30 years old. I remember when I was an engineer at Matimba Power Station, it was an extremely well-done power station. We never had load shedding or anything like that. But now it's 25 years later, it's normal. And you can't necessarily blame anyone for it. It's also the aging infrastructure. So Eskom is in quite a fix. And for us to tie ourselves to a solution related to Eskom is really holding the country to hostage.
Yeah. Now, the argument that they bring normally, Mohammed, to that to say, well, you're providing private companies, of course they can afford to pay, but what Eskom does is also taking care of indigent families. The other question is around the culture of non-payment, right? Is another thing that they say, well, if we take this and we actually put it in the hands of the private producers, a huge portion of society will be in the dark because they just won't have electricity, because those private companies don't play. If they don't pay, they won't be as understanding as Eskom.
Yeah. So I can talk directly from personal experience around it. In the mid-90s, I used to be a capital program manager at Eskom. And I looked after the electrification program in the Eastern, Western, Southern, and Northern Cape. And since then already, Eskom has been making this argument. It is now 25, 26 years later, that argument is gone. We have a very high degree of penetration of electricity in the rural areas in South Africa, better than any other place across the continent. There's still work to be done, admittedly, no doubt, and the population has grown. But we have deep penetration. We can't be trolling out the same argument that they did 25 years ago today, to sort of, again, hold the country hostage just to Eskom, thinking that Eskom alone is the solution. Eskom alone is not the solution, and they need to understand that. Government needs to understand that, and importantly, the private sector needs to understand it. Private sector needs to start looking at solutions outside of Eskom as well, which they are doing, fortunately.
Mohammed Mahdi and Lungile Mashela, rather, thank you very much for your time, and Isaac Mangena as well. We lost him there along the conversation because of some technicalities. And